Hi everyone, this is Vaishnavi from Edureka, and in this session, we'll see what are listeners in Selenium. But before I begin, let's take a look at the agenda of this session. I'll start the session by giving you a proper introduction to what are these listeners in Selenium, and then move on to understand the types of listeners in detail and try implementing a use case parallelly so that you get a clear idea about the types. And finally, we'll end this session by learning about the major differences between them. So let's begin this session by learning the first topic. What are listeners? Listeners are basically the ones who have the ability to listen to a particular event. Now, say you want to share some secret with your friend. So you give him a call and start talking. Now, what is the role of your friend in this case? He basically listens to everything that you want to share. The same goes with the Selenium WebDriver too, guys. Selenium provides certain functionalities that help in listening to a particular event, which in turn acts as an interface. Now, I'll give you a formal definition of what are listeners. Listener is defined as an interface that modifies the default behavior of the program. As the name suggests, listeners listen to the event defined in the Selenium script and behave accordingly. It is used in Selenium by implementing an interface called listeners. The main purpose of using this listeners is to create logs and reports. So now that you've understood what are listeners and also understood why do we use them in Selenium, let's move on to our next topic, that is what are the different types of listeners. There are basically two types of listeners, guys, the WebDriver listener and TestNG listeners. First, we'll discuss about what are WebDriver listeners. People who are working on Selenium must have craved for more logs from the WebDriver so that you can debug your scripts or maybe log more information about your test to the WebDriver. But you couldn't do it. How can you do that using Selenium? That's the whole point, right? There are two listeners, basically events, which help you in doing this process. They are event firing WebDriver and the WebDriver event listener. So first we'll see what is the WebDriver event listener. So this listener basically helps in capturing the WebDriver events. Now what is event firing WebDriver? This event firing WebDriver is a class that implements the WebDriver interface. So what does this mean? So this actually means that you will get all your regular WebDriver methods like find element by ID, find element by tag name. And in addition to this, you'll also have two methods like the register method and the unregister method, where the register method will let you register the implementation process, whereas the unregistered method will help you with the detaching process. So this is about the WebDriver listeners, guys. So now let's try implementing a use case of this WebDriver listener. To do that, we require the Java libraries and we also need an IDE where we can perform some actions. So I'm going to consider working on the Eclipse IDE because it provides various functionalities while working on a Java project. So in order to implement the WebDriver listeners, we need to check if the Java libraries are present. So to do that, I'm going to go to the command prompt and type Java version. This specifies the version of Java installed in my system. So I have Java 1.8. Okay. So after this, we need an IDE where we can perform the actions. So I have the latest Eclipse IDE, guys, because Eclipse provides all functionalities when we are working on a Java project. So you can see that I have the latest Eclipse IDE. So I'm just going to open this, launch the process. Okay, so this is the Eclipse Workspace, guys. And in this case, we'll try automating our official website edureka.co so that we can implement both the WebDriver listener as well as the TestNG listeners. And you can see that I've already created a project by the name Listener WebDriver. And I've also written the code, guys, because I think it'll be useful for you guys when you try to understand the implementation process. So I'm just going to click on the drop down of this project. You can see that the Java libraries are present, guys. And I've also added the TestNG libraries. This source field is where we are going to write our code. So I'm going to click on the drop down. So first I've created a package under which our classes reside. Okay, you can find two classes by name, event capture and listener main class. So these both help in showing how WebDriver listener work. So there's another folder by name referenced libraries. So this contains all the Selenium libraries. So first, let's understand what happens in the event capture program. As you can see that I've created a class called event capture and implement the WebDriver event listener. And once we've implemented the WebDriver event listener, we have to implement the list of methods as shown in this code. Okay, these are all the functions that we are going to implement. I'm going to consider explaining you about one function, guys, here, because all the methods here corresponds to an event. For example, the function called after navigate to, which is called every time the navigate to page is completed. So all we have to do here is put some code inside these methods so that our code is executed every time when the page navigates to some other page. So ideally, we would be adding our login statements here. Okay. And the first function here, that is after change value of, is called every time after you change the value of a specific element. And after click on is called every time after you click the element. Likewise, after navigate forward function, which is called after you navigate to another web page. After navigate function is called every time you want to navigate to another web page. Before change of value, this function is called before you change the value of an element. Before click on, before find by, before navigate back, before navigate forward, before navigate refresh. This helps in refreshing the web page before you navigate through it. And before navigate to, on exception, if there are any exceptions occurring in the program, so this function is called. After alert accept, after you finish accepting the alert, this function is called after change of value. So these are all the basic constructors, guys. So these are the functions that are going to be called every time you specify them in the main page. So what is their main agenda? So their agenda is to act as an interface between the element and the web page. So this is about the event capture program, guys. Now let's move on to understand our main function. You can see that I've created a class called listener main class, under which our main class resides. The first thing you need to do when you're working on Selenium is to set the browser property. So in this case, I'm going to consider working on the Chrome driver. So I'm going to specify the name of the Chrome driver and also specify the path in which it resides, followed by the extension chrome driver.exe, which has to be the executable form. And after this, I'm going to create an object of the WebDriver and call it driver and instantiate the new Chrome driver. So this might throw an error, guys. All you have to do is just import the packages to the project. And once this is done, I'm going to create an object of the JavaScript executor. Now you might ask, what is a JavaScript executor? JavaScript executor is an interface that helps to execute the JavaScript through the Selenium WebDriver. After creating an object, I'm going to link this JavaScript executor to the driver. And after this, I'm going to create an object of the event firing WebDriver. I think you guys have understood what is an event firing WebDriver. It is a class that implements the WebDriver interface. So I'm going to create an object of the same and instantiate it with the new event firing WebDriver and link the driver along with it. And after this, we are going to create an object of our event capture program and call it eCapture and instantiate it with the new event capture. And once we're done with this, we are going to register the event handler function with the object of the event capture using the register function, guys, which helps in registering the implementation process. And once this is done, I'm going to use the navigate to command, which helps in navigating to a particular web page, and also specify the URL of the web page you want to navigate it to. So I'm going to consider the object of the event firing WebDriver and navigate it to a web page, edureka.co/blog. So after you finish navigating through this page, say for example, you want to scroll down through a page. So let's navigate to our web page, edureka.co/blog. So this is the page that we want to navigate it to. Now say if you want to perform the scrolling function here, how would you do that using Selenium? So let's write a piece of code. So I'm going to consider the object of the JavaScript executor JS and execute script with the help of the function window.scrollby. So this function helps in specifying the axis in which you want to scroll down through. The first attribute here contains the x-axis value, which is 0, As you want to scroll down through the page, I'm going to consider the y-axis, which is 400. And I'm going to pause the execution for 3 seconds using the thread command. So it is 3000 nanoseconds, which is basically 3 seconds. Let's say you want to find an element on the web page. So this is the web page. So I'm going to scroll down through the page. Say you want to search for this element software testing on the web page. How would you do that using Selenium? So I'm just going to right click on it, click on inspect. It has a class name, and this is the link text specified here. So I'm just going to copy this link text and go back to our project and write the corresponding code. I'm going to consider the object of the event firing WebDriver and find the element by the link text by specifying the value of the link text, and also click the link text. Say after this you want to navigate to another web page. How would you do that using Selenium, and that too the navigate to function? So I'm just gonna go to our web page. Okay. Now say I want to search for this courses. So I'm just gonna click on this courses and I want to navigate to this particular web page. So I'm just gonna copy this link and go back to my project and specify the URL of the web page. And say you want to navigate to the web page you were working on, that is the blog page. Now, how would you do that using the functions those were specified? So I'm going to consider the object of the event handler and specify the navigate back command. So this command helps in navigating back to our blog page. So once this is done, I'm going to quit the event handler function using event handler.quit. So this particular command helps in ending the event firing WebDriver functions. And after this is done, we are going to unregister the events of the eCapture program. So to do that, I'm going to consider the object of the event firing WebDriver, that is event handler, and specify the unregister function and specify what you want to unregister. Once these are done, I'm going to print end of the listener class to specify if the project is working properly or not. So this is our WebDriver listener. Now let's try to run this code. You can see that Chrome is being automated. It will first open the blog page, scrolls down, clicks on the software testing, and navigates to all courses and comes back to the page. And you can also see the command that is printed here, end of listeners class. So this is how the WebDriver listener work in Selenium. Now let's understand what are the TestNG listeners. TestNG listeners allow customizing of the TestNG reports or logs. Now say you want to get the report of the functions or the programs that you've executed and the log functionalities of the program. So how would you do that using Selenium? So this TestNG plays an important role in getting the reports or the logs of the programs or the processes that you've executed. And the main task of the TestNG listeners is to change the default behavior of the methods and write the own implementation when the test fails or skips. There are many types of listeners which allows you to change the TestNG's behavior. So I've noted down a few of them: I annotation transformer, I annotation transformer 2, I configuration listener, and so on. These interfaces are used in Selenium to generate logs or to customize the TestNG reports. But in this session, we'll mainly concentrate working on the iTest listeners. So this iTest listeners has the following methods. So it is onStart. This method is called when any test starts in the process. OnTest success is called on success of any test case. OnTest failure is a method which is called on a failure of any test. OnTest skipped is called when you've skipped off any test. OnTest failed but within success percentage is called each time when the test fails but is within the success percentage. The last one, onFinish, is called after all the tests are executed. Having understood what TestNG listeners are, let's write a use case of the same. So to do that, we are again going to consider working on the Eclipse IDE. So let's take a look at the Eclipse IDE. So this was the WebDriver listener. So even in this case, I've already created a project and written the code so that you guys find it easy to understand. So I'm going to click on the drop down, directly go to the source folder, default package, where you'll find two classes, one by name listener test and the test cases. So let's try understanding what the listener test program does. So the first thing I'll do here is create a class called listener test that implements the iTest listener. And it might show up an error here, and it'll also suggest two quick fixes. Select the first one, which will say the add unimplemented methods, which will help in adding multiple unimplemented methods without a body, under which we are going to override the function onFinish. I think you guys have understood what onFinish function does. So once you call this onFinish function, I'm going to pass the attribute iTestContext. So what does the iTestContext do? This class defines the test context, which contains all information for a given test run. So I'm going to specify the result along with it and create a constructor of the same. And after this, I'm going to override another function called onStart and also pass the attribute iContextResult. I'm going to do the same with the onTestFailed but within success%. Okay. So we are going to override the functions here and also specify the attribute. So these functions are called when you want to start the process and end it. Now say you want a function to be called when it's failed or skipped or started. So we use the onTestFailure command and specify the attribute iTestResult, which holds the result of the onTestFailure. And I'm going to print this particular command, which says the name of the test case failed, by specifying the name of the test case that failed. After this, say you want to specify the tests that were skipped. So you can specify it using the onTestSkipped command. So this function helps in getting the name of the test case that was skipped. And I'm going to print this command, the name of the test case skipped, by getting the name of the case by using this command result.getName. And after this, say you want to call a function which specifies the start operation. So I'm going to use the onTestStart function, which is called every time the test case starts. Okay. And under this, I'm going to print this command here, which specifies the test is started. And after the execution of the program, now say you want to specify the success of the test. So using this onTestSuccess function, we can specify if the test case was successful or not. So this is our listener test program, guys. Now let's move on and understand our main function, that is test case. Now to implement these listeners into our regular project, that is this test case project, there are two ways you can connect to the class and the interface. So the first method is by using the listeners annotation. So this helps in linking the listeners of the listener test class to our test case class. So after this, I'm going to create a class called test case class, where I'm going to declare the WebDriver as public and create an object of the same. And I'm going to write the annotation test, which tells the JUnit that the public void method attached can be run as a test case. So under which I'm going to create a function called login, and I'm going to write this code inside this so that we can link the TestNG listeners to this test case project. So the very first thing you need to do is set the browser driver. So you can see that I've considered the command system.setProperty, where I've mentioned the name of the WebDriver and also specified the path in which is located. And then I'm going to instantiate the browser driver with the new Chrome driver and try to get the URL of the web page that we want to search. And we are also going to consider using the JavaScript executor to perform scrolling operation. Now say you want to maximize the web page. So I'm going to do that using this command driver.manage.window.maximize. So let's go to our web page, edureka.go. Now say you want to search for this particular search box. So I'm going to inspect this search box. You can see that the ID is present, which is the CSS selector. So just copy this ID and go back to our project and specify the ID. That is this, repeat, and specify the CSS selector using the find element function. do note that CSS selector always starts with the symbol. So if the ID is present, hash is used. So I've specified the hash before the value of the element. And I'm going to send keys to that particular location, that is Test Automation Engineer Masters program, and click the search button. So let's go back to our web page. The search button is what we want to search for. So just click on it and inspect. So you can see that the class is present here. So I'm going to copy this class name and go back to my project and paste it. Okay. And click the search box. And after this, I'm going to perform actions like scrolling down the web page and pausing. So you can see that there are 3 commands here, which contains the object of the JavaScript executor, and I'm going to consider the function window scroll by specifying the axis in which it has to scroll. So I'm going to consider only the y-axis, pause the execution using the thread command. Okay. Now say you want to forcefully fail a test case. How can you do that using Selenium? So we are going to consider the function test2fail, which actually helps in the failure of a test case. So under this function, I'm going to print this particular command. This method is to test the failure. I'm going to consider using the assert function here. That is, we are asserting that the expression is true. If it is not true, then we will display the message and the assertion will fail. In assert false, you are asserting that an expression evaluates to false. Assert true, specify the message and the value is false. That is equal to assert false, where the message and the value is false. So let's try running this program. TestNG detected. Okay, you can see that the login test case started has popped up here. Maximizes the screen. Searches for Test Automation Engineer Masters program. You can see that it is scrolling down through the page without clicking the button. So you can see the output of this, guys. It says 1 test case is successful and 1 test case is passed. Let's look at the console. Okay. You can see that the message is printed here. You can also figure that out using this result. It says 2 test cases are run in total and 1 failure. That is, you can see that it navigated to the web page edureka.co, maximized the screen, searched for the search box and sent keys to it, but it did not click on the search icon. And after that, it continued executing the scrolling function. So it specifies the failure of a test case and also specifies the success rate of the test case. So this is how TestNG listeners work in Selenium, guys. Now let's move on and understand the major differences between the WebDriver listener and the TestNG listeners. The TestNG listeners are used to generate the reports for the test cases. It also helps in capturing the screenshot of the test cases failed, and it also helps in performing events like on test failure, on test skipped, and on test success. Whereas the WebDriver listeners perform jobs like the TestNG listeners of the logging and reporting functions, but it works differently with different events. So these are the major differences between the TestNG listeners and the WebDriver listeners. So this is everything you need to know about listeners in Selenium. Hope you guys got an idea of how listeners work in Selenium. If you want to learn more about Selenium WebDriver, don't forget to take a look at the Edureka Selenium playlist. Thank you for watching this video. Happy learning.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!